and then there's exploring options then.
But are you permitted to explore these options without our input, I guess?
Well, and the issue becomes, when you go to hire an architect, there are architects and then there are architects. The ultimate story I have of an architect is an architect who built a university library, and he didn't take into account the weight of the books, and the entire building started to collapse and sink into Lake Michigan because he didn't have a background in the issues that are specifically to a library. So, you know, it's a two-way street to have input. I mean, there was a study that was done with Mr. McGriff, and of course Ron is very highly regarded in the library community, but of course it's an old study, times have changed. But I think by having the library represented in the activity removes this impression of being counter to the intent of 134.11, because all the players are at the table. Because ultimately the building is a joint responsibility. It's a responsibility of the library board, but it's also the responsibility of the city. The library board doesn't own the building, it's owned by the city. But we all, you know, and especially in the library community, is that we have built, actually I built a library, we have built many, many libraries across the state, and there is the expertise that we can share with an architect to say, these are the things that you need to watch for when you're designing a library building, especially on the issues of accessibility and the multi-use of the building and the fact that it's a cradle-to-grave service. And these are all factors to consider in the design of any building that's going to be used as a library. And to have enough flexibility that a library can change over time. Because one of the difficulties that we have is we have a lot of buildings in the state that were fine for their time, but the cost of retrofitting them to fit the needs of now is many times more than the value of the building itself. And at what point does it become that you are gilding an apple that's decaying? This is a conversation that the Department of Education has a lot with library boards, is at what point is a building not worth renovating? And that's a decision for the community to make with the architect. But you know, you have a lot of factors here. You've got traffic flow, you've got accessibility, and you've got a building where the cost of retrofitting. Now, someone may come up with some idea that could solve these problems. You know, I'm not an architect and I'm not an engineer, but at the same time, including the library board in the conversation means that everybody's at the table, and it takes away that tension that's there right now. Yes, sir?
So, maybe I'm misunderstanding you, but we shouldn't go and do any of our own research on my own time, do anything that has to do with the library, unless I'm sitting at the table with the library board?
No, that's not what I'm saying. It's when it comes to the issue of making
I
decisions.
didn't think that's what we were doing. We were just exploring options, not doing
But you were in an
anything
official
else.
meeting with a representative of an entity that involves library funding. And the library funding is ultimately the responsibility of the library board.
But if I can interject a little bit.
Yes,
You
sir.
have to,
Go ahead,
you have
Terry.
to look at 134.11, which is correct. But the USDA grant for the library is subject to 134.15. And that's up to the city council to decide whether or not they accept a grant. Before the library board can accept any grant, donation, or anything else, this
They
city
have to
council
approve it.
has to approve it.
Yeah.
So, if you're gonna point to them and say you shouldn't have had a meeting, well, this council still has the authority to say whether or not the library board could even accept a grant.
Right,
Any grant, any pledge.
right. But
But-
we're talking about two different things. We're talking about the grant, but we're also talking about the decisions that are made relating to the library building.
But there is nothing wrong with the city council meeting with the USDA to try to preserve assets. And because part of the USDA was a loan that the library board cannot take out by itself.
Right.
They need this group to use taxpayer dollars to pay that loan. You're right that the library board has exclusive control of the money that's levied and put into the library funds, but until it gets to that point, you have to take 134.11 and look at it in conjunction with 134.15, because this group ultimately has the authority over any grant or anything else.
Right. But the bottom line is that if you want to avoid having dissension in the community, it's better to have the players at the table.
I agree, but I just didn't want the impression to be made that they did anything wrong. Now, should they have done something included, that's up for everyone to make their own opinion. But the council has absolute authority over whether or not to accept any loan, grant, bequest, or anything else to the library board. That is their purview.
Right. Well, and occasionally you'll sometimes find someone wants to give a grant and then, or a gift, and then you find that there are 3,000 strings attached.
Correct. The conditions
so-
may be so onerous that the
And
council
so
may
you end up
decide to.
passing on a grant or a gift because it's not worth the hassle that's involved with it. It's just, what I'm trying to do is to encourage more dialogue and more of a sense of a feeling of participation. Because the decisions that you make relating to the funding of relating to the library is going to impact the next 10 years or so of this library, wherever it is, however it is created. Whether it's a renovation of this building, a renovation of another building, or a new one. And the library board represents the library community that is going to be using this library. So, you know, it's better to be at the table and feel part of the discussion, because it removes that impression that decisions are being made behind the scenes. I mean, it's like the complaints that we get about the legislature, where many of the
People
decisions...
complain about the legislature.
Many of the decisions that
You're
are
putting
made
me on.
are from meetings that have nothing to do with hearings. And there's always going to be that tension, and I would rather have a collaborative effort where the library board and the city government are partners, because it is a partner building, than to have this tension, because nobody wins with that type of relationship.
Go ahead, Ben.
I just wanted to say, I don't think anybody, and myself included, and if I'm saying don't have meetings, that's certainly not at all what I'm asking. I'm asking for respect. We are the board of trustees for the library, and if you are planning decisions or talking about decisions that affect the library, we should at least know about it. We shouldn't have to read about it in minutes that have been passed around by email. I mean, a phone call or an email to us saying, something came up, we're talking about this, we're doing this. You know, I shouldn't have to read an EDA minutes report saying that the library project is dead. I mean, that's news to me. I'm on the library board. I didn't know the library project was dead, but that's, you know, those are the things that I'm reading. A little respect to say we're considering some other issues with the money that the library board applied for on behalf of the library and the city. Here's what we're planning. Great, thank you. No surprises. I think we're a little bit happier.
So, I've got a question. Is there something wrong with the council dedicating Mr. Sarvey to look into the liquor store and get an architect to look at that, and get an architect to look at this building?
I wouldn't say it's wrong. It's a question of whether we should all be together on the same page as much as possible. And frankly, we've been talking about this for 15 minutes. Message received.
Yeah.
I think we're just going to have to trust that we're going to correct that mistake and not make it again in the future.
Yeah, let's move forward in a positive manner.
That would be
Because
great.
we have a lot at stake here, and we have the potential for creating a market draw. The library here is loved, but it is struggling, and it could be, one of the things that brings people to the area, and something to be very proud of, because I know the library board works very hard on behalf of it, as does the city council. So hopefully this discussion will help us all move forward. And if you're looking for information relating to, the issues with designing a building or retrofitting a building for library uses, please talk to Ann or to me, and we will be glad to share the recommendations that we have. Because there are special needs for libraries, and there are national and local standards for library buildings.